Marcus Thompson sat at the far end of his mother's dining table, mechanically cutting his turkey while his cousins bragged about their latest promotions and bonuses. The same worn brown sweater he'd been wearing to family gatherings for the past 5 years hung loosely on his thin frame, and his scuffed sneakers were hidden beneath the tablecloth. To his family, he looked exactly like what they'd always believed him to be, the failure who never quite figured out how to make it in the real world. "So, Marcus," his cousin Bradley said with a smirk, adjusting his expensive watch, "still working at that little coffee shop downtown? What's it been now, 7 years?" The question was delivered with the practiced cruelty of someone who enjoyed watching others squirm, and Bradley's wife Jessica giggled into her wineglass at the obvious setup for humiliation. Marcus nodded quietly, not bothering to correct the assumption or explain what he actually did during his days. His family had stopped listening to his explanations years ago, dismissing his talk about projects and investments as the delusional fantasies of someone who couldn't accept his own mediocrity. It was easier to let them believe what they wanted to believe than to endure their skeptical questions and condescending advice. His Aunt Patricia, Bradley's mother, leaned forward with the predatory smile she reserved for family gossip. "You know, Marcus, Bradley just got promoted to regional sales manager. Maybe he could put in a good word for you at his company. They're always looking for people to work in the warehouse." The suggestion was delivered as if it were generous charity, rather than casual insult. "Thanks, but I'm fine where I am," Marcus replied softly, focusing on his mashed potatoes while the familiar knot of frustration formed in his stomach. These family gatherings had become endurance tests, opportunities for his more successful relatives to remind him of his place in the family hierarchy while feeling good about their own achievements. Marcus's mother, Linda, sighed dramatically from her position at the head of the table. "Honey, you're 32 years old. Don't you think it's time to get serious about your career? Your father and I worry about you living in that tiny apartment, working part-time, not dating anyone. We just want you to be happy and successful like your cousins." The comparison to his cousins was a constant refrain in Marcus's life. Bradley worked in pharmaceutical sales and made 6 figures, though he spent most of it on maintaining an image of success that was more impressive than the reality. Their cousin Jennifer was a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm, and cousin David had recently opened a small accounting practice. By conventional standards, they were all doing well, certainly better than Marcus appeared to be doing. "Maybe Marcus is just a late bloomer," Jennifer suggested with false kindness, her tone suggesting she didn't actually believe it. "Some people take longer to find their calling. Though at 32, the bloom might be off the rose, so to speak." Her laugh was sharp and cutting, designed to wound, while maintaining plausible deniability about her intentions. Marcus had learned to let these comments wash over him without response. Fighting back only invited more criticism and gave his family permission to become even more brutal in their assessments of his life choices. They saw his quiet acceptance as confirmation of their judgments, evidence that he knew they were right about his failures and limitations. David, the youngest cousin at 28, decided to pile on with the enthusiasm of someone trying to prove his own worth by diminishing others. "I mean, working at a coffee shop isn't exactly building toward anything, is it? No offense, Marcus, but shouldn't you have some kind of plan for the future? Some goals or ambitions beyond making lattes?" "He's always been a dreamer," Linda said with the resigned tone of a mother who had given up hope for her child's success. "Even in high school, he had all these grand ideas about starting businesses and making money. But dreaming doesn't pay the bills, and at some point, you have to face reality." The reality Marcus's family couldn't see was that he had stopped sharing his actual life with them years ago, after they'd dismissed his early entrepreneurial efforts as childish fantasies. When he'd started his first online business selling vintage electronics at 19, they'd called it a hobby. When he'd parlayed that into importing specialty goods from overseas, they'd warned him about get-rich-quick schemes. Now, at 32, Marcus owned a portfolio of 7 different online businesses that generated over $2 million in annual revenue. He lived modestly by choice, reinvesting most of his profits and maintaining a low profile that had served him well in business. His tiny apartment was actually a penthouse loft in a converted warehouse that he'd purchased outright 3 years earlier. But explaining any of this to his family felt impossible. They'd constructed such a complete narrative about his failure that contradictory evidence was simply dismissed or reframed to support their existing beliefs. When he tried to share his successes in the past, they'd found ways to minimize them or suggest they were temporary flukes rather than genuine achievements. The thing is, Bradley continued, warming to his favorite topic, success requires discipline and hard work. You can't just coast through life hoping things will work out. You have to set goals, make sacrifices, build relationships with the right people. He gestured around the table as if his presence at a family dinner was evidence of his superior networking skills. Patricia nodded approvingly at her son's wisdom. Bradley's absolutely right. That's why he's done so well for himself. He understood early that success doesn't just happen. You have to make it happen. She turned to Marcus with exaggerated sympathy. It's not too late for you to learn these lessons, dear. But you'll need to stop making excuses and start taking responsibility for your choices. Marcus nearly laughed at the irony. He'd been taking responsibility for his choices since his teenage years, building businesses while his cousins were focused on getting good grades and impressing their parents. His approach had been unconventional and largely invisible to family members who measured success by job titles and traditional career progression. You know what Marcus needs? Jessica suggested, her voice bright with malicious helpfulness. He needs a mentor, someone successful who can show him how the real world works. Bradley, maybe you could take him under your wing, teach him some basic professional skills. The suggestion was presented as generosity, but felt like another way to establish hierarchy independence. Linda's eyes lit up at the idea. That's wonderful, Jessica. Bradley, would you be willing to help Marcus figure out a career path? Maybe introduce him to some people in your industry? The request was addressed to Bradley but clearly intended to pressure Marcus into accepting his cousin's guidance and acknowledging his superior position. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said carefully, but I'm actually pretty happy with what I'm doing right now. The statement was met with the familiar combination of pity and frustration that greeted most of his attempts to assert satisfaction with his life choices. Happy? David scoffed. Marcus, you can't pay rent with happiness. You can't build a family or buy a house or plan for retirement on good feelings. At some point, you need to prioritize practical concerns over whatever personal fulfillment you think you're getting from making coffee. The irony was that Marcus could buy houses, plural, without financing, and his retirement planning was more sophisticated than anything his financially struggling cousins had managed to put together. But explaining this would require revealing the full scope of his business operations, and he'd learned that his family's skepticism could be more exhausting than their ignorance. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, with the satisfied expression of someone delivering home truths. The problem with Marcus is that he's never really failed at anything big enough to teach him how the world actually works. He's been coasting on small-time stuff for so long that he doesn't understand what real pressure feels like. Marcus bit back a laugh at the suggestion that he'd never experienced failure or pressure. His businesses had survived 3 economic downturns, multiple supply chain disruptions, and countless smaller crises that would have destroyed less resilient operations. The difference was that he'd learned to handle pressure privately, without the family drama and public declarations that his cousins seemed to require. Success leaves clues, Bradley announced, with the authority of someone quoting a motivational speaker. If you want to be successful, you study successful people and do what they do. Marcus, you've been doing the same thing for years and getting the same results. That's the definition of insanity. Patricia nodded sagely at her son's wisdom. Your cousin makes excellent points, Marcus. Maybe it's time to admit that your approach isn't working, and try something different. There's no shame in acknowledging that you need help or guidance from people who've actually achieved something. The condescension was becoming unbearable, but Marcus had learned that defending himself only provided more ammunition for their attacks. His family had invested too much in the narrative of his failure to easily accept evidence of his success. Their own self-esteem seemed partially dependent on maintaining their superior position relative to him. You know what I think the real problem is? Jessica said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering psychological insights. Marcus is afraid of real responsibility. Working at a coffee shop is safe because nobody expects anything from you. If he tried to do something important and failed, then he'd have to face the fact that he might not be as special as he thinks he is. Linda sighed heavily, the sound of a mother bearing the burden of a disappointing child. "I just wish you'd apply yourself, honey. You're smart enough when you want to be, but you've never shown the kind of drive and ambition that leads to real success. Look at your cousins. They set goals, they work hard, they make sacrifices to build something meaningful." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message, but he ignored it rather than risk appearing rude or disengaged from the family conversation. The irony was that the message was probably from one of his business managers, dealing with issues that involved more money and responsibility than any of his cousins handled in their regular jobs. "The coffee shop thing would be fine if it was temporary," David added, "but 7 years? That suggests a lack of ambition that's honestly kind of concerning. Most people use jobs like that as stepping stones to something better, not as permanent career choices." Bradley nodded enthusiastically at his younger cousin's observation. "Exactly. It's about trajectory, about building towards something bigger. Marcus, what's your 5-year plan? Where do you see yourself in a decade? Because from the outside, it looks like you're just drifting through life without any real direction or purpose." The questions were familiar because Marcus asked them of himself regularly, though his answers would have surprised his interrogators. His 5-year plan involved expanding into 3 new international markets and possibly going public with his largest subsidiary. His 10-year vision included philanthropy on a scale that would dwarf anything his family could imagine. "Sometimes I think Marcus is just too comfortable," Patricia suggested. "He doesn't have a family to support or major expenses, so he can afford to work part-time and live small. But that kind of lifestyle doesn't prepare you for real adult responsibilities." Marcus's phone buzzed again, and this time he glanced at it discreetly. His assistant, Rebecca, was asking about a meeting that had been moved up. He typed back quickly that he'd call her in an hour, then put the phone away before anyone noticed his brief distraction. "Did you just check your phone during family dinner?" Jennifer asked with exaggerated shock. "Marcus, that's incredibly rude. We're trying to have a conversation about your future, and you're more interested in whatever social media nonsense is happening on your phone." "It was a work message," Marcus said quietly, knowing the explanation would only invite more mockery. His family had long since decided that his work wasn't serious enough to warrant the kind of attention they gave their own professional obligations. Bradley laughed at the idea. Work message? From the coffee shop? What could possibly be so urgent at a coffee shop that it couldn't wait until after dinner? His tone suggested that Marcus was either lying about the nature of the message or delusional about the importance of his job responsibilities. "Maybe someone needed to know how to make a cappuccino," David suggested, earning laughs from around the table. "Or there was an emergency shortage of muffins that required immediate managerial intervention." The jokes were delivered with the casual cruelty that had characterized most of Marcus's family interactions for the past decade. Marcus felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment, but before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Linda looked confused, checking her watch to see who might be visiting during their family dinner. "That's odd, I'm not expecting anyone else." "Marcus, are you expecting someone?" Marcus's heart skipped as he realized what was probably happening. Rebecca had mentioned that she might need to bring some documents by if the meeting was rescheduled, and she was the only person who knew his mother's address. He'd given it to her years ago as an emergency contact, never imagining she'd actually need to use it. "I'll get it," Linda said, rising from her chair with the irritated expression of someone whose dinner party was being interrupted by uninvited guests. She walked to the front door while the family continued their conversation about Marcus's professional inadequacies, unaware that everything was about to change. Marcus heard his mother's voice at the door, followed by an unfamiliar female voice asking for him by name. His stomach dropped as he realized that Rebecca had indeed come to find him, and there was no way to prevent the collision between his two worlds that was about to occur. "Marcus," Linda called from the entryway, her voice puzzled. "There's someone here to see you. She says she's your assistant?" The last word was spoken with obvious confusion, as if Linda couldn't quite process the idea that her underachieving son might have an assistant. The dining room fell silent as the family absorbed this unexpected development. Marcus could feel their eyes on him as he slowly rose from his chair, dreading the conversation that was about to unfold but unable to prevent it from happening. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, dressed in the crisp, professional attire she wore to business meetings. She was an elegant woman in her late 30s who had worked for high-level executives throughout her career before Marcus had recruited her 3 years earlier. Her presence immediately changed the energy in the room. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your family dinner, Mr. Thompson," Rebecca said with the polished professionalism that had made her invaluable to his business operations. "But the Yamamoto meeting has been moved up to 7 a.m. tomorrow, and you'll need to review the acquisition contracts tonight. I have everything in the car." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Marcus could see his family members trying to process what they'd just heard. Words like acquisition contracts and Yamamoto meeting that didn't fit with their understanding of who he was or what he did for a living. Bradley was the first to find his voice, though it came out smaller than usual. "I'm sorry, did you say acquisition contracts?" He looked between Marcus and Rebecca as if they were actors in a play he didn't understand. Rebecca smiled politely, unaware of the family dynamic she'd just disrupted. "Yes, the Yamamoto Electronics deal. We're purchasing their North American distribution network. It's a $47 million transaction, so Mr. Thompson needs to be fully prepared for tomorrow's final negotiations." Jennifer's wine glass slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound seemed to break the spell of shocked silence that had fallen over the dinner table. Linda stood frozen in the doorway, staring at her son as if she'd never seen him before. "I'm sorry," Patricia said faintly, "but who exactly are you, and what is your relationship to Marcus?" Her voice carried the desperate hope of someone clinging to a familiar reality that was rapidly disintegrating around her. Rebecca looked surprised by the question, as if the answer should have been obvious. "I'm Rebecca Chen, Mr. Thompson's executive assistant. I've been managing his schedule and handling administrative duties for Thompson Industries for the past 3 years. Are you family members? Marcus has mentioned how much he enjoys these holiday gatherings." The name Thompson Industries hung in the air like a physical presence. David's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, while Jessica gripped the edge of the table as if it might anchor her to a world that still made sense. "Thompson Industries?" Bradley repeated weakly. "As in, Marcus owns Thompson Industries?" He looked at his cousin with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror, beginning to understand that everything he thought he knew about family hierarchy was about to be completely overturned. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out rough with emotion. "Rebecca, these are my family members. I don't think I've ever mentioned that I own the company." He'd referred to his work in vague terms for so long that even Rebecca had assumed he was just an employee, rather than the founder and CEO. Rebecca's eyes widened as she realized her mistake. "Oh my goodness, I had no idea. I just assumed." She trailed off, understanding that she'd inadvertently revealed information that Marcus had apparently been keeping private. "Should I wait in the car while you finish dinner?" "No," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger as the initial shock wore off. "Actually, I think this conversation was probably overdue. Please, come in and meet everyone properly." He gestured toward the dining room where his family sat in stunned silence. Linda walked slowly back to her chair, her legs unsteady as she tried to process what she'd just learned. "Marcus, I don't understand. You work at a coffee shop. You live in a tiny apartment. You don't have money for nice clothes or a car. How can you own a company that does $47 million deals?" Rebecca looked between Marcus and his family, beginning to understand the situation. "Actually, Mrs. Thompson, your son owns 7 different companies under the Thompson Industries umbrella. The coffee shop you mentioned is probably Grounded Coffee Collective. That's one of his smaller operations, about 12 locations throughout the region." Bradley's face had gone pale. 12 locations? Marcus, are you telling me you own a chain of coffee shops?" His voice cracked on the question, as if the possibility was too enormous to fully grasp. "Among other things," Marcus replied, sitting back down at the table and gesturing for Rebecca to take Linda's empty chair. "The coffee shops were actually my first retail venture. I started with one location 8 years ago and expanded from there. But most of my revenue comes from the import business and the tech subsidiaries. Jennifer was staring at Marcus as if he'd revealed himself to be an alien species. Tech subsidiaries? Marcus, what exactly do you do? I mean, what do you actually do? Her voice carried the desperation of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing in real time. Rebecca answered when Marcus seemed hesitant to explain. Mr. Thompson founded Thompson Industries when he was 24, starting with an electronics importing business that he built from his college dorm room. He now owns companies in retail, technology, real estate, and manufacturing. Last year's revenue was approximately $2.3 million. David made a choking sound. $2.3 million? Marcus makes $2.3 million a year? He looked around the table as if seeking confirmation that he'd heard correctly. That's gross revenue, Marcus clarified. My personal income is significantly less after expenses, payroll, reinvestment, and taxes. But yes, the businesses are doing well. His tone was casual, as if discussing the weather, rather than a level of success that dwarfed anything his family had achieved. Patricia was gripping her pearls, literally and figuratively. But Marcus, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were struggling? Why did you let us worry about you and offer you help when you clearly don't need it? The question hung in the air, loaded with years of condescension and unwanted advice. Marcus looked around the table at faces that had spent the past hour lecturing him about responsibility and ambition, and felt a mixture of vindication and sadness at their transformation from arrogant critics to shocked supplicants. Because every time I tried to tell you about my work, you dismissed it as fantasy or delusion, Marcus said quietly. You decided I was a failure, and anything that contradicted that narrative was either ignored or explained away. It became easier to let you believe what you wanted to believe than to keep fighting to be heard. Rebecca was looking increasingly uncomfortable as she realized she'd walked into the middle of a family confrontation. Mr. Thompson, I can certainly wait in the car if you'd prefer to have this conversation privately. I just need you to review those contracts before tomorrow morning. Linda found her voice, though it sounded strained and unfamiliar. No, please stay. I think we all need to understand what's been happening here. Marcus, are you saying that all those times we offered you career advice and job opportunities, you were actually more successful than any of us? The brutal honesty of the question seemed to echo around the dining room. Bradley, who had spent the evening bragging about his six-figure sales job, was now faced with the reality that his underachieving cousin made more in a month than he made in a year. I don't think of it in terms of comparison, Marcus said diplomatically. We all have different paths and different definitions of success. I've been fortunate with my businesses, but that doesn't diminish what any of you have accomplished in your own careers. Jessica laughed, but it sounded forced and slightly hysterical. Marcus, you're being modest. You just found out that while we were giving you advice about getting your life together, you were running a multi-million-dollar company. Don't you think that's worth mentioning? Rebecca cleared her throat gently. If I may, the coffee shop situation might have been confusing. Mr. Thompson does spend time at the original Grounded Coffee location because he enjoys the hands-on aspects of retail management. He often works from there instead of the corporate office. Perhaps that's what led to the misunderstanding? The explanation made sense, but it also highlighted how thoroughly Marcus's family had misinterpreted his life. They'd seen him working at a coffee shop and assumed he was an employee, never considering that he might own the business or that his presence there represented choice rather than necessity. David was shaking his head slowly. Marcus, I feel like I don't know you at all. How long has this been going on? How long have you been letting us think you were struggling while you were actually building an empire? His voice carried a mixture of awe and accusation. It's not an empire, Marcus said, though his modest tone couldn't disguise the magnitude of what Rebecca had revealed. It's just a collection of businesses that happened to work out well, and I wasn't deliberately deceiving anyone. I tried to explain what I was doing for years, but the conversations always seemed to end with advice about getting a, quote, real job, or warnings about unrealistic expectations. Patricia was looking around the table as if seeing her family for the first time. Oh my goodness. Marcus, we've been treating you like a charity case. We've been offering you help and advice, and… Oh dear, this is mortifying. Bradley was staring at his plate, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Marcus, I offered to get you a job in our warehouse. I lectured you about success and responsibility. How could you just sit there and take that? His voice carried genuine confusion about why someone would accept condescension they didn't deserve. Because you're my family, Marcus replied simply. Because I love you, even when you're wrong about me. And because proving you wrong seemed less important than keeping the peace and maintaining our relationships. Rebecca was checking her phone discreetly, clearly aware that time was passing and business obligations still needed to be addressed. Mr. Thompson, I don't mean to rush you, but the contracts really do need your review tonight. The Yamamoto team is flying in from Tokyo specifically for tomorrow's meeting. Linda looked at Rebecca with new respect and a dawning understanding of how seriously she'd misjudged her son's circumstances. Rebecca, I'm so sorry for the confusion. We had no idea about Marcus's business success. This is all quite shocking for us. Please don't apologize, Mrs. Thompson. Family dynamics can be complex, and business success doesn't always translate into personal happiness. Mr. Thompson has always spoken very fondly of these family gatherings, regardless of what you might have discussed. Jennifer was still processing the revelation, her mind clearly racing through years of assumptions and judgments that would need to be reconsidered. Marcus, the tiny apartment you live in, is that really tiny? Or is that another thing we got wrong? Marcus smiled for the first time since Rebecca's arrival. It's a penthouse loft in a converted warehouse downtown. I bought the building 3 years ago and converted the top floor into living space. It's about 3,200 square feet, so not exactly tiny, but I live alone so it feels spacious. The casual mention of owning an entire building sent another wave of shock around the table. These weren't just revelations about Marcus's income, but about a completely different lifestyle and level of wealth than anyone had imagined. You own the building? David asked weakly. Marcus, exactly how much money do you have? The question was blunt but seemed to express what everyone was thinking. Rebecca looked to Marcus for permission before answering. Mr. Thompson's personal net worth is private information, but I can say that Thompson Industries' combined assets exceed $15 million. The businesses are quite successful and have been growing consistently for the past 8 years. The numbers seemed to reverberate around the dining room. $15 million represented wealth beyond anything the family had encountered before, the kind of success that placed Marcus in a completely different economic category than any of them had imagined possible. Bradley pushed back from the table, his appetite apparently destroyed by the evening's revelations. Marcus, I need to apologize. We all need to apologize. We've been incredibly presumptuous and condescending, and clearly we had no idea what we were talking about. You don't need to apologize, Marcus said, though his voice suggested that apologies might actually be appreciated. You were working with the information you had, and I could have corrected your assumptions at any time. I chose not to because it seemed easier than explaining everything. Patricia was dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. But honey, why was it easier? Why didn't you want us to know about your success? Are you ashamed of us? Or worried that we'd ask you for money? Or what? The question touched on deeper issues about family relationships and the complications that wealth could introduce into established dynamics. Marcus considered his answer carefully, understanding that his response would shape future family interactions. I wasn't ashamed of you, he said finally, but I was tired of having to prove myself constantly. When I was starting out, everything I did was questioned or dismissed. You meant well, but the constant skepticism and advice became exhausting. It was easier to stop sharing than to keep defending my choices. Rebecca glanced at her phone again, then at Marcus. I really am sorry to interrupt, but it's getting late and you have the early meeting. Could we perhaps continue this conversation another time? Her professional obligations were clearly weighing on her mind. Linda stood up immediately. Of course, Rebecca. Marcus, you should take care of your business responsibilities. We can talk more about all of this later. Her tone had shifted completely from the maternal condescension of earlier to something approaching respect. Marcus rose from his chair, understanding that the evening's family dinner was effectively over despite the unfinished meals and unresolved tensions. I should review those contracts. But I'm glad this finally came out. Maybe we can have different kinds of conversations going forward. As Rebecca gathered her materials and Marcus prepared to leave, the family sat in stunned silence around the table, laden with half-eaten Thanksgiving dinner. The man they'd been lecturing about responsibility and ambition was walking away to conduct international business negotiations involving more money than any of them would see in their lifetimes. "Marcus," Bradley called out as his cousin reached the doorway. Could we talk soon? Really talk? I feel like I owe you more than just an apology." Marcus paused in the doorway, Rebecca waiting patiently beside him with her briefcase full of acquisition contracts. "I'd like that," he said simply, "but maybe next time we can skip the part where you assume I don't know what I'm doing with my life." As the door closed behind Marcus and Rebecca, the family was left to contemplate how thoroughly they'd misjudged the person they thought they knew best. The loser they'd been patronizing was actually the most successful person any of them had ever met, and their Thanksgiving lectures about responsibility and ambition had been delivered to someone who'd built an empire while they were building their own modest careers. The silence stretched on as they tried to process not just Marcus's success, but their own assumptions, prejudices, and the years of condescension they'd heaped on someone who had needed neither their advice nor their pity. Outside, Rebecca was probably briefing Marcus on $47 million acquisition details while they sat among the ruins of their family dinner and their shattered misconceptions. Jennifer was the first to speak, her voice small and wondering. "Do you think he'll ever forgive us for being so wrong about everything?" The question hung in the air above the scattered remains of their Thanksgiving meal, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable, while somewhere across town, the family loser was reviewing international contracts and preparing for negotiations that would reshape entire markets. The reversal was complete, but the healing would take much longer than a single evening of shocked revelations. The next morning, Marcus sat in his downtown office reviewing the Yamamoto contracts, while Rebecca coordinated with the legal team in Tokyo. The acquisition meeting had gone flawlessly, with Marcus demonstrating the same calm competence that had built his business empire over the past 8 years. But his mind kept drifting back to the expressions on his family's faces when Rebecca had walked into that dining room. His phone had been buzzing constantly since he'd left his mother's house, messages from various family members wanting to talk, apologize, or simply understand what had happened. He'd ignored most of them, focusing instead on the multi-million-dollar deal that required his immediate attention. But now, with the contract signed and the acquisition complete, he couldn't avoid thinking about the conversation that needed to happen. Linda had called 4 times and sent 6 text messages, each one more apologetic and confused than the last. "Marcus, please call me. I don't understand how we got everything so wrong. I need to talk to my son." The messages revealed a mother grappling with the realization that she'd fundamentally misunderstood her own child for years. Bradley's messages were different, carrying the weight of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered. "Marcus, I can't stop thinking about what an ass I've been. How do you even begin to apologize for years of condescension? I feel sick about the things I said to you." His humiliation was palpable even through text messages. Rebecca knocked on Marcus's office door, entering with her usual professional efficiency. "The Yamamoto deal is finalized, and the wire transfers are complete. You've just acquired the largest electronics distribution network on the West Coast." She paused, studying his expression. "You don't seem as excited as usual about closing a major acquisition." Marcus looked up from his phone, realizing that his assistant had probably spent more time with him over the past 3 years than his own family had. "Rebecca, yesterday when you mentioned that I'd talked about enjoying family gatherings, I never actually said I enjoyed them, did I?" She considered the question carefully. "No, you usually seemed stressed before family events and tired afterward. But you always went, and you never complained directly. I assumed that meant they were important to you, even if they were difficult." "They are important to me," Marcus admitted, "but last night was probably the first time in years that my family saw me as I actually am, rather than who they assumed I was. I'm not sure how to handle that change in dynamic." Rebecca had worked for enough high-level executives to understand the complexities of wealth and family relationships. In my experience, Mr. Thompson, family members often have the hardest time accepting success because it challenges their understanding of who you've always been. But that adjustment period can lead to much healthier relationships if everyone is willing to do the work. David had sent a message that was more thoughtful than his usual communications. Marcus, I keep thinking about all the times I lectured you about responsibility and planning for the future. Meanwhile, you were building something incredible that none of us even bothered to understand. I'm embarrassed, but more than that, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. Jennifer's apology was characteristically dramatic. Marcus, I literally cannot sleep knowing how horrible we've been to you. You must think we're the most shallow, judgmental people in the world. Please, give us a chance to make this right somehow. Patricia had called twice but hadn't left messages, probably struggling to find words that could address years of maternal condescension directed at a nephew who had achieved more than she'd ever imagined possible. Her silence spoke volumes about the magnitude of her shock and regret. Marcus's intercom buzzed with Rebecca's voice. Your mother is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important family business. The formality in Rebecca's tone suggested she understood the sensitivity of the situation. Send her in, Marcus replied, straightening his tie and preparing for a conversation he'd been avoiding since childhood. Linda walked into his office looking smaller and more uncertain than he'd ever seen her, clearly overwhelmed by the corporate environment that represented her son's actual daily life. Marcus, this office is beautiful, Linda said, looking around at the floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, and wall-mounted monitors displaying real-time business data. I had no idea you worked somewhere like this. I pictured you behind a coffee shop counter, not in a corner office overlooking the city. She sat down across from his desk, the same desk where he'd signed contracts worth millions of dollars and made decisions that affected hundreds of employees. Honey, I came here to apologize. But I also came here to understand. How did we get so wrong about your life? How did I fail so completely as your mother? Marcus felt his throat tighten at the pain in her voice. Mom, you didn't fail as a mother. You just made assumptions based on incomplete information. And I never corrected those assumptions because it seemed easier than constantly defending myself. But Marcus, why didn't you tell us about your success? Why didn't you let us be proud of you? Linda's voice cracked with emotion. All these years, I thought you were struggling and unhappy, and it turns out you've been building this incredible business empire. I feel like I don't know my own son. The admission hung between them, highlighting the gulf between perception and reality that had defined their relationship for years. Marcus realized that his mother's concern had been genuine, even if it was based on false premises and delivered through condescending advice. I tried to tell you, especially in the early years, Marcus said gently. But every time I talked about my business plans or my successes, they were dismissed as unrealistic dreams or lucky breaks. Eventually, I stopped sharing because the skepticism was more exhausting than the secrecy. Linda wiped tears from her eyes, beginning to understand how her well-intentioned concern had created distance rather than closeness. I remember some of those conversations now, and I realize I was so focused on protecting you from disappointment that I couldn't see your actual achievements. I thought I was being a good mother by encouraging realistic expectations. Rebecca appeared in the doorway with coffee service, understanding intuitively that this conversation would benefit from the comfort of hospitality. She served both Marcus and Linda before retreating discreetly, leaving them to navigate the emotional complexity of their relationship reset. Mom, I know you meant well, Marcus said after Rebecca had left. But realistic expectations became limiting beliefs. And limiting beliefs became self-fulfilling prophecies for everyone except me. I succeeded despite the lack of family support, not because of it. The bluntness of his assessment clearly hurt Linda, but she nodded with the recognition of someone finally seeing their own behavior clearly. You're right, and I'm ashamed of that. Marcus, can you help me understand what you actually do here? I want to know about your real life, not the version I created in my imagination. Marcus spent the next hour explaining his various businesses. From the coffee shops that had been his entry into retail, to the technology companies that generated most of his current revenue. Linda listened with growing amazement and pride, finally seeing her son's accomplishments for what they actually were. "The coffee shop where you spend time, that's where it all started?" Linda asked, beginning to understand why that location held special significance beyond its current profitability. "That's where I learned about customer service, inventory management, staffing challenges, and profit margins," Marcus confirmed. "Everything I do now builds on lessons I learned from that first location. It's still my favorite place to work when I need to think or when I want to stay connected to the retail side of the business." Linda shook her head in wonder. "And we saw you there and assumed you were just an employee. We never ask the right questions or listen to your actual answers. Marcus, how can we rebuild our relationship from here? How can we be the family you deserve instead of the family that held you back?" The question was profound, touching on issues of identity, respect, and the possibility of changing established patterns of interaction. Marcus realized that his mother was asking for guidance on how to love him better, a request that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. "I think we start by having honest conversations like this one," Marcus said, "and maybe by assuming good intentions instead of assuming incompetence. I've never needed you to solve my problems, but I've always needed you to believe that I could solve them myself." Linda reached across the desk to take her son's hand, a gesture that felt different now that she understood the full scope of his capabilities and achievements. "I believe in you now, Marcus. I should have believed in you all along, but I believe in you completely now." Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Bradley. "Marcus, I know you're probably busy with important business stuff, but could we meet for coffee sometime? Preferably at one of your coffee shops so I can start understanding your actual life, instead of the fantasy version I created." The message made Marcus smile, recognizing his cousin's attempt to approach their relationship reset with both humor and humility. "Mom, I think the whole family is going to need some time to adjust to this new dynamic. But maybe that adjustment can bring us closer together instead of driving us further apart." Linda stood to leave, understanding that her son had business responsibilities that extended far beyond their family conversation. "Marcus, I'm proud of you. I should have been saying that for years, but I'm saying it now. You've built something incredible, and you did it with grace and dignity even when we couldn't see it." As his mother left the office, Marcus felt a mixture of relief and apprehension about the family relationships that would need to be rebuilt from scratch. The revelation had cleared the air, but it had also created new expectations and dynamics that would take time to navigate successfully. Rebecca returned after Linda's departure, carrying messages from 3 different business partners and a reminder about Marcus's afternoon conference call with investors. "How did the conversation with your mother go?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "Better than I expected," Marcus replied. "I think we're going to have to learn how to be family members all over again. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Sometimes relationships need to be rebuilt from the foundation up." His phone rang with a call from Jessica, Bradley's wife, who had probably been designated as the family's spokesperson for collective apologies. Marcus answered, curious about how she would approach the conversation after years of dismissing him as a failure. "Marcus, it's Jessica. I hope it's okay that I'm calling you at work. I mean, at your office, at your company." Her voice carried the uncertainty of someone navigating completely unfamiliar territory. "I wanted to apologize for last night and for years of being completely wrong about everything." "Jessica, you don't need to apologize for making assumptions based on incomplete information," Marcus said, though his tone suggested that apologies weren't entirely unwelcome. "We all make judgments based on what we think we know." "But Marcus, we weren't just making assumptions. We were being condescending and dismissive and, frankly, cruel. The things we said about your ambition and your future? Oh God, you must have been sitting there thinking we were complete idiots." Marcus couldn't deny that there had been moments when his family's ignorance had been painful to endure. "I mostly thought you loved me, but didn't understand me. That hurt, but it wasn't malicious. You were trying to help, even if your help was based on incorrect assessments of what I needed." Jessica's relief was audible. Bradley hasn't stopped talking about how mortified he is. He keeps saying he lectured a millionaire about responsibility and success. He's actually sick with embarrassment about the whole thing. Tell Bradley that embarrassment isn't necessary, Marcus said, but maybe curiosity would be helpful. If he wants to understand what I do and how I built these businesses, I'd be happy to explain. I've always been willing to share that information with family members who were genuinely interested. The conversation with Jessica lasted 20 minutes, covering years of misunderstandings and establishing a foundation for more honest future interactions. When Marcus hung up, he realized that his family's shock was gradually transforming into genuine interest in his actual life, rather than their imagined version of it. Rebecca knocked on his door again, this time with David on the line. He says it's important and he'll only take a few minutes, she explained, holding the phone with her hand over the receiver. David, what can I do for you? Marcus answered, noting that his cousin's voice sounded different, more respectful and less presumptuous than usual. Marcus, I've been thinking about this all night, and I realized something important. I've been giving you career advice for years, but you're the only one in our family who actually built a career from scratch. Maybe I should be asking you for advice instead of the other way around. The role reversal was startling in its completeness. David, who had spent the previous evening lecturing Marcus about professional development, was now acknowledging that Marcus was the expert, and he was the one who needed guidance. David, we all have different strengths and different paths, Marcus replied diplomatically. Your accounting practice is something you should be proud of. Success isn't a competition between family members. But Marcus, you started with nothing and built a multi-million-dollar company. I started with a business degree and a loan from my parents, and I'm still struggling to make my practice profitable. Maybe there are things I could learn from your approach. The conversation revealed how completely the family dynamics had shifted overnight. The cousin who had been most vocal about Marcus's lack of ambition was now seeking mentorship from the same person he'd been criticizing 24 hours earlier. Marcus found himself in the unexpected position of family business advisor, a role that felt both vindicating and slightly uncomfortable. If you want to talk about business development strategies, I'm happy to share what I've learned, but let's start from a place of mutual respect, rather than assumed hierarchy. As the day progressed, Marcus received calls or messages from every family member who had attended the Thanksgiving dinner. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: shock, embarrassment, apology, and requests for guidance or understanding. The family member they'd been treating as a cautionary tale had become someone they wanted to emulate. Patricia's call was the most emotionally complex, carrying the weight of a woman who had spent years offering maternal guidance to a nephew who had never needed it. Marcus, I keep thinking about all the times I treated you like a child who couldn't manage his own life. Meanwhile, you were managing multiple businesses and hundreds of employees. How do you even forgive something like that? Aunt Patricia, forgiveness isn't the issue, Marcus replied. Understanding is the issue. If we can understand how miscommunication and assumptions created this situation, we can prevent it from happening again in future relationships. The conversations were exhausting but necessary, each one requiring Marcus to navigate years of accumulated hurt while maintaining the family connections that remained important to him. By the end of the day, he felt emotionally drained but cautiously optimistic about the possibility of healthier family dynamics. Rebecca stayed late to help Marcus process the day's business obligations, understanding that the family revelations had created additional stress that needed to be managed alongside his professional responsibilities. Mr. Thompson, it seems like your family is genuinely interested in rebuilding their relationships with you. That's relatively unusual in situations like this. What do you mean, situations like this? Marcus asked, curious about Rebecca's perspective based on her experience with other successful executives. Wealthy individuals often face family dynamics where relatives become either resentful of success or overly interested in financial benefits. Your family seems more focused on understanding their mistakes and rebuilding genuine relationships. That suggests good underlying character, even if their previous behavior was problematic. Marcus realized that Rebecca's observation was accurate. None of his family members had asked for money or favors, and their apologies seemed focused on relationship repair rather than positioning themselves for future advantage. Their mortification appeared genuine rather than calculated. The next few weeks brought a series of family conversations unlike any Marcus had experienced before. Instead of defending his choices or enduring condescending advice, he found himself in the role of teacher and mentor to relatives who were genuinely interested in understanding his business success. Bradley arranged to shadow Marcus for a day, observing board meetings, strategic planning sessions, and operational reviews that gave him insight into the complexity and scope of his cousin's professional responsibilities. "Marcus, I had no idea business ownership involved this level of strategic thinking," Bradley admitted. "I thought successful people just worked harder at simple tasks." Jennifer asked to tour the various Thompson Industries facilities, wanting to understand the scope of Marcus's operations. Her amazement was obvious as she visited the coffee shops, the import warehouse, the technology development labs, and the corporate offices that employed over 300 people across multiple locations. David sought Marcus's advice on expanding his accounting practice, recognizing that his cousin's experience with business growth could help him overcome the challenges that had kept his firm small and struggling. The irony of seeking business advice from the family member he'd lectured about professional development wasn't lost on either of them. Linda began visiting Marcus's office regularly, not to offer unwanted advice, but to learn about her son's actual daily life, and to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of truth rather than assumptions. She took pride in understanding his work and became one of his most enthusiastic supporters. The family's Christmas gathering was completely different from their Thanksgiving disaster. Instead of lectures about responsibility and ambition, conversations focused on Marcus's business strategies, industry insights, and plans for future growth. Family members asked thoughtful questions and offered genuine support rather than condescending guidance. "This is what family gatherings should feel like," Marcus told Rebecca when she called to confirm his schedule for the following week. "Mutual respect, genuine interest in each other's lives, and support for everyone's goals and achievements." Rebecca smiled at the satisfaction in his voice. "It sounds like the revelation was ultimately positive for everyone involved. Sometimes family relationships need to be rebuilt completely before they can function properly." As Marcus prepared for another year of business growth and family relationship building, he reflected on the unexpected benefits of being forced out of secrecy. The family that had once seen him as their greatest disappointment now recognized him as their greatest success story. More importantly, they were learning to value him for who he actually was, rather than who they'd assumed him to be. The loser they'd lectured at Thanksgiving had become the family member they all wanted to emulate, and their transformed relationships proved that people could indeed change their perspectives when confronted with undeniable evidence of their mistakes. Sometimes the most powerful revelations came from assistants walking through dining room doors at exactly the right moment. 6 months after the Thanksgiving revelation, Marcus found himself in an unprecedented situation. His family was actually asking for his opinion on major life decisions. Bradley had called that morning seeking advice about whether to leave his pharmaceutical sales job to start his own consulting firm, a conversation that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "Marcus, I know this might sound crazy coming from me, but I've been thinking about what you said about building something from scratch," Bradley explained during their coffee meeting at the original Grounded Coffee location. "I have some industry contacts and I think I could make consulting work, but I'm scared of giving up the security of a steady paycheck." Marcus sipped his coffee, noting the irony of having this conversation in the same place where his family had assumed he was just an employee. "What does your financial situation look like? Do you have enough savings to cover expenses for 6 months while you build a client base?" The questions were practical, rather than patronizing, reflecting genuine interest in helping Bradley make an informed decision. "That's the thing. I don't really know how to evaluate whether I'm financially ready. I've always just spent what I made and hoped for the best," Bradley admitted. "Jessica and I live pretty close to our income limit, so there's not much cushion for risk-taking." The admission highlighted one of the key differences between Marcus's approach to money and his family's relationship with financial planning. While they'd been focused on earning more, Marcus had been focused on building sustainable systems that generated ongoing revenue while controlling expenses. "Would you like me to introduce you to my financial advisor?" Marcus offered. "She could help you analyze your current situation and develop a realistic timeline for making the transition." Starting a business isn't just about having a good idea, it's about having the financial foundation to survive the inevitable challenges. Bradley's face lit up with gratitude. "Marcus, that would be incredible. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I feel like you're the first person in our family who actually understands what it takes to build something successful. All these years I thought I was ahead of you, but you were playing a completely different game. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Marcus sharing lessons learned from his own entrepreneurial journey while helping Bradley think through the practical aspects of business ownership. It felt good to use his experience to help family members pursue their own goals rather than defending his choices against their criticism. Rebecca had observed the change in Marcus's family relationships with professional interest. "Mr. Thompson, your stress levels around family events have decreased significantly," she noted during one of their weekly planning meetings. "The change in family dynamics seems to have had positive effects on your overall well-being." Marcus realized she was right. The constant tension of hiding his success while enduring condescending advice had been more exhausting than he'd recognized. Now that his family understood and respected his achievements, family interactions had become sources of energy, rather than drains on his emotional resources. Jennifer had surprised everyone by asking Marcus to speak at her company's leadership development workshop. "I told my boss about your business success and your approach to building multiple revenue streams," she explained. "He wants you to share your insights with our management team about scaling operations and maintaining company culture during growth." The request represented a complete reversal from Jennifer's previous dismissal of Marcus's work as unimportant. Now she was positioning him as an expert whose insights could benefit her own career development, a shift that still amazed both of them. David's accounting practice had started growing after he implemented several of Marcus's suggestions about client development and service expansion. "Marcus, I have to admit something embarrassing," David said during a family barbecue at Linda's house. "I used to think business success was mostly about luck and timing. But watching you operate, I realize it's really about systems, relationships, and consistent execution over long periods of time." The barbecue itself was different from previous family gatherings. Instead of Marcus sitting quietly while others dominated conversations, he found himself at the center of discussions about business strategy, market trends, and entrepreneurial opportunities. His opinions were sought and valued rather than dismissed or ignored. Patricia had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation in her relationship with Marcus. The aunt who had once offered him warehouse jobs was now bragging to her friends about her nephew's business empire and seeking his advice about her own retirement planning. "Marcus, I've been thinking about what you said about passive income streams," Patricia said as they sat on Linda's back porch watching the cousins' children play in the yard. "I have some money in savings accounts earning almost nothing in interest. Could you help me understand better investment options?" Marcus found himself becoming the family's unofficial financial advisor, a role that felt both validating and slightly overwhelming. People who had once questioned his basic competence were now trusting him with their most important financial decisions. Linda had started volunteering at a nonprofit organization that helped low-income individuals start small businesses. Inspired by her new understanding of her son's entrepreneurial journey, "I realize now that I spent years discouraging the exact kind of thinking that led to your success," she told Marcus. "Maybe I can help other people avoid making the same mistakes I made." The volunteer work had given Linda new perspective on business development and the challenges facing aspiring entrepreneurs. Her conversations with Marcus had evolved from maternal concern to genuine collaboration about how to support people pursuing economic independence through small business ownership. Marcus's romantic life had remained largely separate from family interactions, partly because he'd learned to compartmentalize different aspects of his life during the years of hiding his success. But the changed family dynamics had made him more open to introducing potential partners to his relatives. He'd been dating Sarah Chen, a marketing executive he'd met through business networking, for 8 months. Their relationship had developed slowly as Marcus learned to trust someone with knowledge of his full life, rather than carefully edited versions designed to avoid judgment or gold digging. "I'd like you to meet my family," Marcus told Sarah during dinner at one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. "But I should probably warn you that they've recently learned some things about my business success that have changed our family dynamics significantly." Sarah laughed at his careful phrasing. "Marcus, I've known about your business empire since our second date. Your assistant Rebecca introduced herself to me at that charity fundraiser, remember? She assumed I already knew about Thompson Industries. The question is whether your family will like me, not whether I'll be shocked by your success." The reminder made Marcus realize how much his relationship with transparency had evolved since the Thanksgiving revelation. He no longer felt the need to hide his achievements or downplay his success with people he cared about, a freedom that felt both liberating and slightly unfamiliar. Sarah's introduction to the family went smoothly, with everyone making obvious efforts to be welcoming and supportive rather than critical or judgmental. The change in their approach to Marcus's life choices extended to their acceptance of his relationship, marking another positive shift in family dynamics. "She seems wonderful," Linda told Marcus privately after Sarah's first family dinner. "And more importantly, you seem happy and relaxed with her. I'm glad you found someone who appreciates you for who you really are." Marcus realized that his mother's comment touched on something important. Sarah had known about his business success from the beginning, so their relationship was built on complete honesty rather than the careful editing that had characterized his family interactions for years. The one-year anniversary of the Thanksgiving revelation was marked by a family celebration that would have been unthinkable during the previous era of their relationships. Instead of Marcus dreading family gatherings, he found himself looking forward to conversations with relatives who genuinely wanted to understand his work and support his goals. "A year ago, we thought Marcus was our biggest disappointment," Bradley said during his toast at the anniversary dinner. "It turns out he was our biggest success story, and we were too blind to see it. Here's to the family member who succeeded despite our lack of support, and who's generous enough to help us succeed, now that we finally understand what we're looking at." Rebecca had been invited to the anniversary celebration, recognition of her role in forcing the revelation that had transformed the family's relationships. "Mr. Thompson, it's been interesting to watch how much your family relationships have improved," she observed. "Your stress levels around family events have decreased dramatically, and you seem much more comfortable being yourself around them." The transformation had been so complete that Marcus sometimes felt like he was interacting with entirely different people, rather than the same family members who had spent years lecturing him about responsibility and ambition. Their genuine interest in his business operations and their respect for his expertise still surprised him occasionally. Thompson Industries had continued growing throughout the year, partly because Marcus no longer felt the need to hide his success or maintain the fiction that his businesses were small-scale operations. The mental energy he'd previously spent managing family perceptions was now available for business development and strategic planning. "I think keeping secrets was actually holding back my business growth," Marcus told Sarah during one of their regular evening walks. "When you're constantly editing yourself and hiding your achievements, it limits your ability to network effectively and take advantage of opportunities that require confidence and transparency." The insight had broader implications for Marcus's approach to all his relationships. The years of compartmentalizing his life to avoid judgment had created habits of secrecy that extended beyond family interactions to affect his professional networking and personal relationships. Bradley's consulting firm had launched successfully with Marcus's guidance and financial backing, creating the first official business partnership between family members. "I never imagined I'd be going into business with my cousin," Bradley told Marcus during one of their weekly strategy meetings. "A year ago, I was offering you warehouse jobs. Now you're my business partner and mentor." The partnership had been structured carefully to maintain both professional standards and family relationships, with clear agreements about roles, responsibilities, and decision-making authority. Marcus's experience with business operations provided strategic oversight, while Bradley's industry expertise handled client development and service delivery. Jennifer had been promoted to marketing director at her company, partly based on insights she'd gained from her conversations with Marcus about business development and market positioning. "Marcus, I have to thank you for all the advice you've given me this year," she said during a family gathering. "Understanding your approach to business strategy has completely changed how I think about my own career development." David's accounting practice had grown to the point where he was considering hiring additional staff, an expansion that required the kind of strategic planning Marcus had been helping him develop. "I finally understand what you meant about systems and scalability," David told Marcus. "Before, I was just trying to work harder. Now I'm working smarter." The family's transformation had extended beyond their relationships with Marcus to affect how they interacted with each other. The humility and self-reflection required to acknowledge their mistakes about Marcus had made everyone more open to questioning their assumptions about other family members as well. "This whole experience has taught me that we were all making judgments based on incomplete information," Patricia reflected during the anniversary celebration. If we could be so wrong about Marcus, how many other things have we been wrong about? It's made me much more careful about assuming I understand other people's situations. Marcus found himself in the unexpected position of family peacemaker and advisor, helping relatives navigate their own relationship challenges with the same patience and strategic thinking he applied to business problems. The skills that had built his business empire were proving valuable for rebuilding family connections. As the anniversary evening concluded and family members prepared to return to their respective homes, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary year of relationship transformation that had followed Rebecca's unexpected appearance at Thanksgiving dinner. The family that had once seen him as their greatest failure now recognized him as their greatest success. But more importantly, they'd learned to value him for who he actually was, rather than who they'd assumed him to be. "Thank you for giving us the chance to get to know the real you," Linda said, as she hugged her son goodbye. "I'm sorry it took so long for us to see what was right in front of us, but I'm grateful we finally figured it out." As Marcus drove home to his penthouse loft, he realized that the most valuable thing he'd gained from the revelation wasn't his family's respect for his business success, but their willingness to build relationships based on truth, rather than assumptions. The man they'd called a loser had indeed won, but the victory was measured in authentic connections rather than financial achievements. The story that had begun with a family's cruel misjudgment had become a testament to the possibility of redemption, growth, and the transformative power of honest communication. Sometimes the most important business deals weren't about acquiring companies, but about acquiring the freedom to be yourself with the people who mattered most. 2 years after the revelation, Marcus faced a challenge that would test his family's newly rebuilt relationships in ways none of them had anticipated. Thompson Industries was being courted by a major international conglomerate offering to acquire the entire company for an astronomical sum, nearly $50 million, that would instantly make Marcus one of the wealthiest individuals in the region. The offer came during what should have been a routine board meeting, delivered by representatives from Nakamura Global Holdings who had been quietly researching Thompson Industries for months. "Mr. Thompson, we've been impressed by your company's growth trajectory and your innovative approach to integrated business operations," the lead negotiator explained. "We believe Thompson Industries would be an excellent addition to our North American portfolio." Marcus listened to the presentation with growing unease, not because the offer wasn't generous, but because accepting it would mean giving up the businesses he'd spent 15 years building from scratch. The coffee shop where everything had started, the import operations that had taught him about international markets, the technology subsidiaries that represented his vision for the future, all of it would disappear into a larger corporate structure. "I'll need time to consider your proposal," Marcus told the Nakamura representatives, though his instinct was already leaning toward rejection. "This is obviously a significant decision that affects not just me but everyone who works for Thompson Industries and all the communities where we operate." Rebecca had been taking notes throughout the meeting, and she approached Marcus afterward with obvious concern. "Mr. Thompson, that's an extraordinary offer. $50 million would set you up for life and allow you to pursue any goals you wanted without financial constraints. But you don't seem excited about the possibility." "Because I'm not excited about it," Marcus admitted. "These businesses aren't just financial assets to me. They're expressions of my values and my vision for how companies can serve communities. Selling to Nakamura would probably mean layoffs, cost-cutting, and the loss of everything that makes Thompson Industries special." The decision was complicated by the fact that accepting the offer would solve financial problems for several family members who had been struggling despite the economic recovery. Bradley's consulting firm was facing cash flow challenges, David's accounting practice needed capital for expansion, and Jennifer had been laid off from her marketing job and was considering starting her own agency. Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of holding the key to his family's financial security, while facing a decision that felt like betraying everything he'd worked to build. The money would be life-changing not just for him but for everyone he cared about. "Marcus, you have to at least consider this offer seriously," Linda urged during an emergency family meeting convened to discuss the situation. $50 million is more money than our family could spend in 10 lifetimes. Think about what you could do with that kind of financial freedom. Bradley was more direct in his advocacy for the sale. "Marcus, I know these businesses mean a lot to you, but this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You could sell now, help all of us get our finances sorted out, and then start new businesses if you wanted to. You've already proved you can build successful companies. But Sarah, who had become Marcus's closest advisor on major decisions, understood his reluctance better than his family members did. This isn't just about money for Marcus, she explained to the assembled family. These businesses represent his identity and his values. Selling them would be like selling pieces of himself. Jennifer, struggling with unemployment and mounting bills, found it difficult to understand Marcus's hesitation. Marcus, I know the businesses are important to you, but think about what $50 million could mean for everyone. You could help Bradley expand his consulting firm, help David grow his practice, help me start my agency. We could all succeed together. The pressure from family members who had recently learned to respect his business judgment created an unexpected dilemma. Marcus had spent years being dismissed and ignored by his relatives, and now their newfound confidence in his decisions was being used to encourage him to make a choice that felt fundamentally wrong. I understand everyone's perspective, Marcus said carefully, but I need you to understand mine. Thompson Industries isn't just a collection of assets that can be sold for the highest price. These businesses employ over 400 people, support dozens of community organizations, and represent 15 years of relationship building and values-driven development. David pressed the point that was probably on everyone's mind. Marcus, we're not saying you should sell just to help us financially. But $50 million would give you the freedom to pursue any goals you wanted without worrying about business operations, employee management, or market pressures. You could focus on philanthropy, travel, family time, anything that really mattered to you. Marcus realized that his family's argument contained an assumption that business ownership was primarily about financial accumulation rather than purpose and impact. They saw the sale as liberation from responsibility rather than abandonment of mission, a perspective that highlighted how differently he viewed success and wealth. What if I don't want liberation from these responsibilities? Marcus asked. What if managing these businesses and supporting these employees and serving these communities is exactly what I want to be doing with my life? What if the money is secondary to the impact? The question seemed to confuse family members who had spent decades believing that financial security was the ultimate goal of professional activity. They struggled to understand why someone would choose ongoing responsibility over immediate wealth, especially when that wealth could solve problems for everyone they cared about. Patricia, trying to find middle ground, suggested a compromise. Marcus, what if you could negotiate terms that would protect the employees and maintain the company culture you've built? Maybe Nakamura would agree to conditions that would preserve what's important to you, while still providing the financial benefits of the sale. Rebecca, who had been researching Nakamura Global Holdings since the meeting, provided information that wasn't encouraging for that approach. Mr. Thompson, Nakamura's track record with acquisitions suggests they're primarily interested in operational efficiency and cost reduction. Most of their acquired companies experience significant layoffs and cultural changes within the first year. Marcus felt the weight of multiple competing loyalties, to his employees, to his family, to his own values, and to the communities that depended on Thompson Industries for jobs and economic stability. The decision that had initially seemed obvious was becoming increasingly complex as he considered all the people who would be affected by his choice. Sarah suggested that Marcus take time to thoroughly evaluate the proposal rather than making an immediate decision based on family pressure or gut reaction. This is too important to rush, she advised. You should analyze the offer carefully, consider alternative strategies, and make sure any decision reflects your actual priorities rather than external expectations. Marcus spent the following week conducting a comprehensive review of his businesses, his personal financial situation, and his long-term goals. The analysis confirmed what he'd suspected. He didn't need $50 million to achieve any of his personal or professional objectives, and selling would eliminate his ability to pursue the community-focused business development that gave his work meaning. I'm going to decline the Nakamura offer, Marcus announced during a family dinner that felt reminiscent of the tension surrounding the original Thanksgiving revelation. The money is attractive, but it's not worth sacrificing everything I've built and everything I want to accomplish in the future. The response was mixed, with some family members expressing disappointment, while others acknowledged that the decision was ultimately his to make. Linda seemed torn between wanting financial security for the family and respecting her son's autonomy and judgment. "Marcus, are you sure you're not letting pride or stubbornness influence this decision?" Bradley asked. "Sometimes the smartest business move is knowing when to cash out and move on to new opportunities. And sometimes the smartest business move is knowing what you have and refusing to give it up for money," Marcus replied. "I've spent 15 years building companies that operate according to my values. Why would I sell them to people who don't share those values?" Jennifer's disappointment was obvious, though she tried to hide it. "Marcus, I respect your decision, but I hope you'll still consider helping those of us who are struggling financially. Maybe there are other ways you could use your success to support family members without selling your businesses." The request opened a conversation about family financial support that Marcus had been avoiding since the original revelation of his wealth. He'd been careful not to create dependency relationships with relatives, but the current economic challenges facing several family members suggested that some assistance might be appropriate. "I'm willing to discuss specific needs and how I might be able to help," Marcus said carefully. "But I want any financial assistance to be structured in ways that support your own goals, rather than creating dependency. I'd rather invest in your businesses and projects than just give money without clear purposes." Rebecca had been observing the family dynamics with professional interest, recognizing patterns she'd seen in other wealthy families dealing with requests for financial assistance. "Mr. Thompson, you might want to consider establishing formal policies for family financial support. Clear guidelines can prevent misunderstandings and maintain healthy relationships." The suggestion led to several weeks of family meetings where Marcus worked with his relatives to understand their financial challenges and develop support strategies that aligned with his values and their needs. The process was sometimes difficult but ultimately strengthened relationships by creating transparency and mutual understanding. Bradley's consulting firm received a bridge loan to address cash flow problems, structured as a business investment rather than charity. David's accounting practice got capital for expansion in exchange for equity partnership. Jennifer received startup funding for her marketing agency with clear repayment terms and performance expectations. "This feels much better than just asking for help," Jennifer told Marcus after they'd finalized the terms for her agency funding. "Having you invest in my business means you believe in my ability to succeed, not just that you feel sorry for my situation." The family's financial challenges had been addressed through Marcus's business success, but without requiring him to sacrifice the companies and values that had created that success in the first place. The solution satisfied everyone's needs while maintaining the integrity of Thompson Industries. Nakamura Global Holdings was predictably disappointed by Marcus's rejection of their acquisition offer, but they expressed interest in potential future negotiations if his circumstances changed. "Mr. Thompson, we respect your decision, but please keep us in mind if you ever reconsider selling. Companies like Thompson Industries are rare, and our offer will remain competitive." Marcus felt relief rather than regret after declining the $50 million offer, confirmation that he'd made the right choice for his values and long-term goals. The money would have solved immediate problems but created new ones, particularly the loss of purpose and identity that came from building and operating mission-driven businesses. "You chose purpose over profit," Sarah observed as they celebrated the resolution of the acquisition pressure. "A lot of people would have taken the money and figured out their values later. You did the opposite, and I think that's why your businesses have been so successful in the first place." The experience had tested Marcus's family relationships in ways that revealed both their strength and their limitations. While everyone ultimately respected his decision, the process had highlighted different perspectives on money, success, and the relative importance of financial security versus personal fulfillment. "I'm proud of you for sticking to your principles," Linda told Marcus during their next private conversation. "I may not fully understand why you chose responsibility over wealth, but I understand that it was the right choice for who you are and what you want your life to mean." Rebecca had watched the entire acquisition drama unfold with professional admiration for Marcus's decision-making process. "Mr. Thompson, I've worked for executives who would have jumped at that offer without considering the broader implications. Your willingness to prioritize values over money is exactly why Thompson Industries has the culture and reputation it does. As Marcus returned his focus to business operations and family relationships, he realized that declining the Nakamura offer had been as much about preserving his identity as protecting his company's. The man who had been called a loser by his family had ultimately rejected $50 million because he knew who he was and what mattered to him, a level of self-knowledge that no amount of money could buy. The story that had begun with family humiliation and hidden success had evolved into a testament to the importance of staying true to your values, even when massive financial incentives suggested compromise. Sometimes the most important business decision was knowing what you wouldn't sell at any price. 3 years later, Marcus stood in the newly opened community center that Thompson Industries had built in partnership with the city, watching his nephew, Jake, Bradley's 12-year-old son, explain his science fair project to a group of impressed judges. The center served as headquarters for Marcus's expanded scholarship program, offering after-school tutoring, entrepreneurship classes, and mentorship opportunities for kids from all economic backgrounds. "Uncle Marcus," Jake said, running over after winning second place in the competition, "I want to start a business like you did when you were young. Can you teach me about importing and supply chains?" The question made Marcus smile, remembering when his own family had dismissed such entrepreneurial interests as unrealistic fantasies. Sarah, now his wife of 18 months, joined them with their 6-month-old daughter Emma, sleeping peacefully in her stroller. "I think Jake's caught the family business bug," she said, watching as several other young relatives gathered around Marcus to discuss their own entrepreneurial ideas. "You've created quite the dynasty of young entrepreneurs." The community center was filled with families from throughout the region, many of them connected to Thompson Industries through employment, scholarships, or business partnerships. Marcus's decision to decline the Nakamura acquisition had proven prescient. The company had continued growing and now employed over 800 people across 12 states, all while maintaining the values-driven culture that made it special. Rebecca approached with the latest quarterly reports, her role having evolved to Chief Operating Officer as Thompson Industries had expanded. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted you to see these numbers before the board meeting next week. Revenue is up 37% from last year, and employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time high." Marcus glanced at the reports, noting that Thompson Industries was now generating more annual revenue than the Nakamura acquisition offer had been worth. More importantly, the company had created thousands of jobs and supported dozens of community organizations while maintaining competitive returns for investors. Bradley walked over with Jennifer and David, all three of them having found success in their respective businesses with Marcus's guidance and investment. Bradley's consulting firm had become one of the region's most respected business advisory services, Jennifer's marketing agency had landed several major national accounts, and David's accounting practice now served over 200 small businesses. "Marcus, we wanted to thank you again for believing in us when we were struggling," Jennifer said, her voice carrying genuine gratitude. "Not just for the financial support, but for showing us what was possible when we stopped limiting our own thinking." David nodded, adding, "Remember when we used to lecture you about responsibility and planning for the future? It turns out you were already 20 steps ahead of us, and you had the grace not to point that out while we were being condescending jerks." Linda approached the group carrying Emma's diaper bag, her role as grandmother having brought her immense joy and a new perspective on family legacy. "Marcus, watching you with Emma reminds me of how much I missed when you were growing up. I was so focused on protecting you from disappointment that I couldn't see your actual potential." Marcus looked around at his family, successful, supportive, and genuinely interested in each other's lives, rather than competing for status or recognition. The transformation from their dysfunctional Thanksgiving dynamic to this community celebration felt almost miraculous in its completeness. Patricia joined the conversation, having recently retired and begun volunteering full-time with Marcus's scholarship program. "Marcus, I've been working with some of the scholarship recipients on their college applications, and several of them cite you as inspiration for their business plans. You've become a role model for an entire generation of young entrepreneurs. The comment highlighted something Marcus had been reflecting on lately. His influence had grown far beyond his original family circle to affect hundreds of young people who saw his story as proof that background didn't determine destiny, that business success could be combined with community service, and that authentic values were more valuable than financial accumulation. Sarah took his arm, guiding him toward a quieter corner of the community center where they could watch the celebration while having a private moment together. "Do you ever regret declining that acquisition offer?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Never," Marcus replied without hesitation. "That money would have solved immediate problems, but it would have eliminated everything that makes this work meaningful. Look around. None of this would exist if I'd sold to Nakamura. The jobs, the community programs, the scholarship recipients, the family businesses we've helped launch, all of that would have disappeared into someone else's corporate structure." Emma stirred in her stroller, and Marcus picked up his daughter, marveling at how much his life had changed since that Thanksgiving dinner when his family had called him a loser. The scared, defensive man who had hidden his success for years had become someone comfortable with both achievement and vulnerability, confident enough in his own worth to build authentic relationships based on truth rather than carefully managed perceptions. "You know what I realized?" Marcus said, bouncing Emma gently while watching his extended family celebrate throughout the community center. "That Thanksgiving when Rebecca walked in and everything changed. That wasn't the moment I became successful. I'd already been successful for years. That was the moment I became free to be myself with the people I loved." Sarah smiled, understanding what he meant. "And now Emma gets to grow up in a family where success is celebrated rather than hidden, where authenticity is valued over appearances, and where everyone's potential is recognized and supported." As the community center celebration continued around them, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey from family disappointment to family patriarch, from hidden success to public recognition, from defensive secrecy to confident transparency. The story that had begun with cruel words and painful misunderstandings had become a testament to the possibility of transformation, growth, and the healing power of honest communication. Rebecca approached one final time, carrying a folder that contained plans for Thompson Industries' next expansion phase. "Mr. Thompson, the Detroit Community Development Project has been approved. We'll be opening our first facilities there next spring, bringing approximately 300 new jobs to the area." Marcus nodded, understanding that his business success had become a platform for community impact rather than just personal enrichment. The man his family had once called a loser was now creating opportunities for thousands of people to succeed, proving that authentic success was measured not by what you accumulated, but by what you made possible for others. As the evening wound down and families began heading home, Marcus found himself standing with his parents, his wife, his daughter, and his transformed extended family in the lobby of a community center that existed because he had refused to compromise his values for money. The building was filled with the laughter of children, the conversations of entrepreneurs, and the quiet satisfaction of people who understood that the most valuable inheritances were knowledge, opportunity, and the belief that anything was possible. "You know what's funny?" Linda said, watching Jake and his cousins plan their next business venture while their parents looked on with pride and encouragement. "If Rebecca hadn't walked into that Thanksgiving dinner, we might have spent years continuing to misunderstand each other." Sometimes the most important moments come from the most unexpected interruptions. Marcus smiled, remembering the shock on his family's faces when his assistant had casually mentioned $47 million acquisition contracts. That moment of revelation had forced everyone to confront their assumptions and rebuild their relationships on foundations of truth rather than misconception. As they walked toward their cars in the parking lot, Marcus carried his sleeping daughter while Sarah walked beside him, and his extended family followed in groups, still discussing business plans and family celebrations and all the possibilities that lay ahead. The man they had once dismissed as their greatest disappointment had become their greatest success story, but more importantly, he had become the foundation upon which an entire network of success and opportunity was built. Looking back at the community center that bore the Thompson Industries logo and housed programs that would affect thousands of lives for generations to come, Marcus understood that he had indeed amounted to something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Not because of the money or the businesses or the recognition, but because he had learned to use his success in service of others, creating ripple effects of opportunity and hope that would continue long after he was gone. The story that had begun with a family calling him a loser at Thanksgiving had become proof that the most powerful response to others' limited expectations was simply to exceed them so thoroughly that everyone benefited from your success. Sometimes the best revenge was indeed success, but the best success was always shared. As Marcus buckled Emma into her car seat and prepared to drive home to his penthouse loft overlooking the city where it all began, he realized that the scared young man who had hidden his achievements for years had finally found the courage to be exactly who he was meant to be: successful, generous, authentic, and surrounded by people who loved him for all the right reasons. The family that had once seen him as their failure now recognized him as their foundation, and their transformed relationships proved that people could indeed change when confronted with undeniable evidence of their mistakes. The assistant who had walked into that dining room and changed everything had given them all the gift of truth, and truth had set them all free to become better versions of themselves. The end.